Hey guys, Yip here with another video, and this one is actually going to be a video I've never really made before. This is going to be a beginner's guide for affliction locks, okay? So people that have come onto an affliction lock don't really know the spec too well. I'm just going to talk about how the spec works, what the design of the spec is, some of the abilities, basic rotations, and kind of how to work it. This is on the PTR, so this will be up to date for 7.2.5 when it is released. So maybe some people who are curious about Affliction Lock maybe want to start playing it. Maybe some people who are advanced can pick up a few little minor tips here and there that you didn't know before. And people who have just started on the class, hopefully this is a good way to get you introduced to it, okay? So first and foremost, let's kind of talk about the role of an Affliction Lock in a raid setting, okay? So Affliction Lock is a dot spec primarily, okay? We're a spec that has a bunch of dots. What this means, damage over time ability. When we put these spells onto the target, they don't deal damage immediately, they deal damage over time. So over time, your dots will hit harder and harder. They take every 1 to 2 seconds. So you can imagine that makes us very good at sustained damage on targets, but pretty weak on bursting. Affliction isn't really a class that has a lot of cooldowns, so if you like seeing big, crazy burst windows, that's probably not going to be the class for you. But if you like having sustained damage on a lot of targets, which means, the more targets you have, the more targets you can dot, the more damage your dots will deal, or on a boss fight that has a long duration will actually be able to sustain a large amount of DPS compared to other classes, Affliction might be the one for you. So obviously we have Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction. These are our base dots. Corruption is just that dot that deals the same damage every time. It's kind of like that baseline dot. The damage doesn't change, it's just very steady. Agony, however, is a ramp dot, so the longer that Agony is on your target, the more damage it deals. And Unstable Affliction is kind of like your cooldown dot. You don't have an infinite amount of these Unstable Afflictions to use. It's in fact used by our resource, which is Soul Shards, and it's your hardest hitting dot, so you can imagine you would use this when you want to do a lot of damage. Okay, so those are the Affliction Lock dots. We can talent into more. I'll talk about the talents a little bit later, but let's talk about the main goal of an Affliction Lock, obviously, okay? So I've talked about these damage over time effects. Now, the way that Affliction uses these damage over time effects is, yes, to do a big amount of sustained DPS, but the main goal is to modify these dots, okay? So you put all of your aids onto the target, you put all of these dots that are going to be ticking over time, and you want to modify them, and Blizzard has given us a lot of modifiers. The main one, though, is through your artifact ability. When you equip your artifact weapon, you get this ability called Reap Soul, and what you do is when you consume the Reap stacks, you deal increased damage and your dots hit harder, okay? So when you go into your Affliction weapon, you have all of these traits, okay? And I'll include a link in the description below where you can find an order to put all of your traits in. We have all of these traits, okay? And you see here, this one increases the damage of Agony, this one increases the damage of Unstable Affliction. So a lot of them modify your dots. And when you use your artifact ability that you generate while you're in combat, it doubles the effect of these traits. So your Agony no longer is increased by 20%, it's increased by 40%. And your Unstable Affliction is no longer crit increased by 8%, it's increased to 16%. So you can see that when you're using this, this is obviously very good to use when you're using a lot of your damage because it will modify your dots by a lot, okay? Another way that Blizzard lets us modify our dots is through the talent system, okay? So we have a lot of talent options as an Affliction Lock. Don't worry, it's not too bad. We only pick and choose a few of them for each encounter, but it's a good idea to know what they do. So let's just go over the talents really quick. So in Tier 1, these are kind of your base talents. These are ones that really define your playstyle as an Affliction Lock. Generally speaking, you don't take Haunt. What it does is when you put it on the target, it increases the damage you deal by 15%. So this is one of the modifiers I was talking about, but it's just not as strong as the other two options, so I'll ignore it for now. So we have Writhe and Agony, and we have Malefic Grasp. So remember earlier in the video when I said Writhe and Agony was that ramping dot? This just increased the amount of ramp that Writhe and Agony can do. So you can imagine on a fight with a lot of mobs that you can put a lot of dots on, the fact that your ramp dot that hits very hard if it's been on the target for a long period of time can stack to 15 stacks instead of 10. So at a base right now, it stacks 10 times. When you talent into this, it goes to 15. It makes it very strong, and I'm just going to show you guys what that looks like when you put it on the target. So without this talent, if I was to put my Agony on the target, you can see that it deals damage, and watch it increase, right? 15k, 23k, 74k, 38k, 46k, and it just keeps going up and up and up until it reaches 10 stacks, and that's its cap, okay? So you can imagine if you have a lot of these agony stacks out, and if you let them all get to full, if you increase it from 10 to 15, that can be a lot of increased damage, okay? So technically speaking, Writhe and Agony is your multi-target first tier talent choice. It allows you to dot a lot of things, and when you can dot a lot of things and get this ramp, you're going to be doing a lot more damage. The other talent in the first tier tree helps Warlocks out with our single target, okay? While channeling Drain Soul, your damage over time effects deal 25% increased damage to the target. So remember how I talked about modifying all of those dots? This just makes it extremely powerful on single target when you have time to cast your filler. So what a filler is an ability that you use when you don't have any more dots to press. So as a Warlock, if I was to put my Agony and my Corruption on the target, all I have left is my Unstable Afflictions, which is used by Soul Shards. So you see here, I generate Soul Shards while in combat via my Agony. My Agony actually is my Shard Gen. And when I press them, I have no more abilities to use, right? I can put a few AUAs on the target, and that's about it as a Warlock. So what do you do when you have no more resource and you want to use a filler? You cast Drain Soul. So Drain Soul is the Warlock filler. What it does is it drains the target's soul, causing damage, and heals you for a proportion of the damage that it deals. So the idea with Malefic Grasp is you put your dots on the target, you cast a few of your big heavy hitters, and you channel Drain Soul. Now what this does is not only your filler, which is doing damage, but by talenting into Malefic Grasp, it allows you to increase the dots that you have on the target by 25%, okay? The reason we consider this to be the single target talent and not the all-around choice, because 25% does seem like a lot, is because on a multi-target fight, you don't have a lot of time to use your filler. You don't have a lot of time to channel that Drain Soul, so for most of the part, you're just going to want to be running Writhe and Agony on the cleave. So for single target, Malefic Grasp is vastly used as the choice, and for multi-target, you're tending to run Writhe and Agony instead, okay? So that's the first tier. In the second tier, again, there's one option we ignore. We never really take Empowered Life Tap. The two important talents are Contagion and Absolute Corruption, okay? So what Contagion does is you deal 15% increased damage to targets affected by your Unstable Affliction. So this is, again, is another modifier that affects your dots. So combining this with Malefic Grasp on single target, you get two damage modifiers, the 25% and the 15%, making it extremely powerful, okay? But the other talent in this tier, Absolute Corruption, Corruption is now permanent and deals 25% increased damage, is one of those talents that you can now run on multi-targets. So you can kind of see how the talents are synergizing together. You can run Writhe and Agony and Absolute Corruption on a multi-target, and I'm going to show you guys why you would want to do this. So on multi-target, you have to spend your globals, right? You can only press one button every so often, and obviously since your dots have a duration, you can only dot so many things. But when you run Absolute Corruption, since your Corruption is permanent, you don't have to use as many globals. So on a multi-target dotting fight, if I was to, apply Corruption to all of the targets like this, you see it's permanent. I don't have to refresh it. What this means is I have more globals to get out my Agonies like this, cast my resourcing Unstable Afflictions, and by this way, I don't have to use globals wasted on using Corruption, okay? It's really, really strong on multi-target. It's highly recommended. Not only does it increase the damage, but it also lets you do more things on multi-target instead of having to sit there and spam globals using Corruption, which you don't really want to be doing, okay? So really powerful on multi-target with Writhe and Agony. They synergize well together. And Malefic Grasp and Contagion, again, synergize really well on single target because those two modifiers multiply together. In the level 60 tree, we actually have a few interesting choices. I'm skipping over the 45 and the 75 tree because they're just utility choices. They're just defensives or utility in terms of crowd control. But we're just going to go over the damage traits for now. So we have Soul Harvest. This is, again, another modifier. Increases your damage and your pet's damage by 20%, lasts 12 seconds, increased by 4 seconds for each target affected by your Agony, up to a maximum of 36 seconds. So what this ability does is it increases your damage by 20%. This is really good for single target or for a fight where there's like a lot of little adds and you can spread a lot of Agonies and then do even more single target to increase the duration of this ability. But what it truly allows you to do is just add another modifier to your single target and increases your MG by 20%, increases the Contagion by 20%, and it also increases your base damage by 20%. And when all of these multiply together, it's just a crazy, crazy, crazy amount of DPS gain, okay? So Soul Harvest is kind of that, again, that single target talent that you're going to want to be using to buff all of your dots when you have them out. And our other two options are more AoE options. So we have this one, Sow the Seeds. Seed of Corruption will now embed a demon seed in 2 additional nearby enemies. So I haven't showed you guys this ability yet, but Seed of Corruption is our way of doing on-demand area of effect damage. It's our only ability that hits multiple targets with one cast, and it costs a soul shard, so the same as Unstable Affliction, our resource that is generated by Agony. What it does is you put it onto the enemy, and after that enemy takes a certain amount of damage, it will explode, dealing a large amount of AoE damage to multiple targets and applying corruption onto them. This is really useful on multi-target because you don't want to be using those globals on corruption, so the idea is instead of having to manually cast them, you can just cast a Seed of Corruption like this and blow it up, and it will automatically put corruption onto every mob when it explodes, okay? So this is kind of like our on-demand AoE, and the reason you would want to take Sow the Seeds is on a fight where there are a lot of mobs, you can spam this AoE ability and actually get a lot of damage. So I'm going to show you guys that here, how this works. So on a multi-target fight, say it's like, 4 or 5 targets, you can run this and just spam it to do a crap ton of damage. So when you put your seed on all the targets and you use some agonies just to get that shard generation so you can cast more of these, and you start spamming them on the targets, you see how the corruptions are put up when they explode, and you can just sit here and spam it. It's your AoE ability. This is how you deal area of effect DPS, and you see here, just sitting here spamming it, I'm doing well over 2 million DPS on all of these targets. So it's really, really strong. Once you get past 4 targets to run this talent, it really increases your damage a lot on multiple targets because it triples the amount of seeds that you put out. You put 2 more out instead of just 1, okay? So, 3 times as many. Really, really, really strong ability. The last one that I'm going to talk about in this tier that is useful is called Phantom Singularity. What it does is it places a phantom on the target, and when it deals damage in an area effect. So this is kind of like an AoE dot. So you can imagine this would be very good on scenarios where on a boss fight he spawns a lot of little ads that only live for 10 to 15 seconds, and you don't have time to dot all of them and they're kind of spread out. This could be a really good option. It's super, super good for multi-target dotting fights where there's 3 targets and you're dotting them all and you don't feel like running Soul Harvest. Phantom Singularity is definitely a really good option. I'm just going to show you guys what it does over here. So when I press Phantom Singularity, you can just see it's an AoE dot. When I put it on the target, you see all these mobs will start taking an AoE damage. So it's our only AoE dot in the game. It's pretty strong as a talent, so on a 2-3 target cleave fight, this would definitely be the option that you go for because on each target it just does a whack load of DPS. We can see from one use of that Phantom Singularity, it was almost 4 million damage on 4 targets. So really, really good talent. In the level 90 tier, we only take this one. It's called Grimoire of Supremacy. What it does is it allows us to use a Doomguard or opposingly an Infernal as a permanent pet. These pets are pretty standard. Infernal is your AoE pet, so it does AoE damage. Doomguard is your single target pet. It just attacks one mob. So this talent covers both AoE and single target, and it's just a better option than Service and Sacrifice. Now, our level 100 talents are fairly interesting. Soul Conduit, Siphon Life, and Death's Embrace. Death's Embrace was recently added in this patch. What it does is when the target gets below 35% in health, you start to deal more damage, okay? It's like around 1.3% damage, I think, increase every percent the mob goes down. So at 35% health, you're dealing 0% increased damage, and at 0% health, you're dealing 50% increased damage. So it's an execute effect. So in total, when the target's below 35% health, you're averaging around 25% damage increase. And Siphon Life, this is just another dot that you can put on your target. It's very good for multi-target dotting, as you can imagine. The more of these you have out, the more damage you'll be dealing. And it also heals you, so it's kind of a nice little niche scenario like that. The last talent is Soul Conduit. Every soul shard you spend has a 20% chance to be refunded. So what this means is whenever you use your Unstable Affliction or your Seed of Corruptions, whenever you spend that soul shard, 20% of the time, that soul shard that you spend can be refunded. And those refunded shards can also be refunded. So this comes out to being around a 25% increase on shard generation. So those are the talents. You can see that we have kind of a lot of builds. I'm just going to show you really quick the ones that I would recommend you guys run. So for AoE, this generally speaking is probably one of the best builds to AoE with. For multi-target dotting, this is a really good option. For single target, you can either run these talents here or these talents here. Okay, You can just, if you want to go back and look at those talents in the video really quickly, you can just take a peek and take a screenshot of when I did it. But I'm not going to show you how to use all the builds on single target. Those will come in later videos when I talk about the builds in specific, okay? So that's pretty much how Affliction Warlock works. That's how the talents work. That's how the damage modifiers work. I'm going to talk about a few more little niche things about Warlocks before I end the video. If you're curious about how to do damage with these talents that I've shown you, I'm going to be making videos about that in the future. This is just kind of a guide to introduce you guys to Warlock. So just a few last things for Warlock. We have this thing called Pandemic. Now, Pandemic is a word I use a lot in my videos, and if you're a new Warlock, you might not understand what it means. What Pandemic is when you put your dot on your target and you refresh it early, part of the duration of your dot will add to your new dot. So for example, when I put Agony on the target, it lasts 16.4 seconds, okay? Let's wait for this Devil's Due to fall off because this is a haste increase. So when I put my Agony on the target, it lasts 16.4 seconds. If I was to refresh it, it goes up to 21 seconds. If I was to refresh it again, 21. So it caps out at 21 seconds, okay? So whenever you put a dot on the target, 30% of the dot's remaining time will be added to your new dot. So when the dot is below 5 seconds, all of that time will be added to the new dot. If your dot is above 5 seconds, 5 seconds will be added to the new dot, roughly speaking. So 30% of the dot's duration will be added to the new dot. So if I was to spam all of my dots, they would just have a longer duration. This just makes the rotation flow a little bit smoother, so you don't have to wait for your dots to fall off to refresh them without losing DPS, obviously, right? Because if you refresh your dots early, you're wasting a global. But if you refresh them at the last second, you might miss a tick. So the idea is you want to be refreshing your dots when they get below, 30%. You might think this is pretty hard to do, but it's not too bad. You just kind of wait until you see this little ticking bar here is about here, and then you refresh. And then you can you go about spending your soul shards in between like this, channeling your drain as your filler, and then you refresh your dots like this on Pandemic timers, okay? Just like that. So super, super easy to do. Super, super easy to play. So yeah, that's all you want to be doing. Just refresh your dots in Pandemic, spend your soul shards and stuff like that, and that's what Pandemic is, okay? So this has been a fairly, beginner Warlock guide. If you guys are curious or have any questions, make sure to post them in the comments below. I'll be making more guides in the future about how to play on single target, how to play on multi-target, what are the best legendaries, things like that. So that will kind of answer the questions that I didn't talk about in this video because I didn't want to make this video too long, but that's a pretty beginner guide for Warlocks. Hope you guys liked it. Hopefully it helps you out a little bit if you're kind of curious about the spec, and I will see you guys later.